With a very stern voice, Officer Wilson announced to the black woman in the car, "I smell something suspicious coming from this vehicle. Step out of the car," he said. Zora, the black woman, remained eerily calm, her eyes calculating every detail of her surroundings. The same tactical awareness that had kept her alive in combat zones across the world. "Officer, with all due respect, I don't consent to a search of my vehicle," Zora replied. "You people always think you're above the law," he snarled, slamming his hand against the vehicle. "Get out!" But instead, Zora didn't move. Wilson's posture stiffened. "Why are you making this difficult? Do you want me to make your life difficult? Because I love making people's lives difficult." His hand moved to rest on his holster, especially ready for people who don't know their place. Wilson thought he was in total control, and that his prejudice could overshadow this black woman just like the others. But he had no idea who he was really messing with. He didn't know that Zora was a woman who held power he could never reach. Commander Zora. Daniels navigated her silver sedan through familiar streets she hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. At 35, she carried herself with the unmistakable precision that comes from military discipline. Back straight, eyes constantly scanning her surroundings, movements efficient and purposeful. The quiet girl who left after high school now commanded one of the most elite SEAL teams in the Navy. To the townspeople, she was just another visitor passing through. Her hands rested perfectly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Old habits die hard when you've been trained to maintain control in chaos. The dashboard photo showed Zora in dress uniform receiving a commendation, a life worlds away from these quiet streets. Millfield, the city she grew up in, hadn't changed much. The same courthouse where her grandfather once worked as a janitor. The police station where as a child she'd been told to always speak respectfully to officers. The community center where her mother taught piano until funding was cut. What had changed was invisible to most. The growing divide between who gets protected and who gets suspected. New businesses flourished on the north side, while the south side struggled. New faces were welcome depending on what they looked like. Zora noticed Officer Blake Wilson's patrol car before he even flipped on his lights. His sudden interest in her vehicle wasn't surprising. She'd been pulled over in her hometown before. This time, she was just here to visit her aunt after completing a classified operation overseas. 3 weeks of hard-earned leave after months of deployment. The flashing lights came on. No siren, just lights. Zora signaled and pulled over perfectly, already reaching for her registration and license. By the book? Always by the book. Officer Wilson approached, hand resting on his holster. An unnecessary posture for a routine traffic stop. "License and registration," he demanded, not even attempting courtesy or explaining why she'd been pulled over. "May I ask what the violation was, officer?" Zora's voice was steady, respectful, but firm. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," Wilson said, despite the fact that Zora had come to a complete stop. Counting the regulation 3 seconds before proceeding, she handed over her documents without argument. No point challenging him now. Years of military strategy had taught her to choose her battles wisely. Wilson studied her license with growing suspicion. "You're not from around here anymore. Just visiting family, sir." "I'm on leave." His eyes narrowed as he shined his flashlight through her windows, sweeping across the immaculate interior. "Nothing to find. Nothing to hide. There is no contraband in my vehicle, Officer Wilson," Zora stated calmly, noting his name badge. "I know my rights." Wilson stepped closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your kind always think you know your rights. Think you're so smart with your fancy words?" He looked around to check if anyone was watching before continuing. "But out here, I decide who has rights. I decide who goes home and who goes to jail tonight." Something flashed in Wilson's eyes, anger at being challenged, especially by someone who knew the law. Someone who wasn't intimidated. "Exit the vehicle now," he demanded, hand moving to his taser. "You people always want to make things complicated." Zora complied with practiced precision, movements deliberate, hands always visible. The same protocol she'd followed in hostile territories worldwide, never give anyone reason to perceive a threat. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Wilson ordered, his voice rising as a second patrol car approached. He leaned in close enough that only she could hear. "I've dealt with plenty like you. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd shown some respect." She complied, stance balanced, breathing controlled. 12 years of combat training screamed at her to defend herself. 12 years of discipline kept her perfectly still. That's when it happened. Wilson deliberately bumped into her as he approached, then suddenly staggered back dramatically, clutching his face. "She hit me!" he shouted toward his approaching colleague. "Officer, I need backup." Zora hadn't moved an inch. Her hands remained spread on the hood of her car, visible to the dashboard camera, visible to the approaching officer. "I did not touch you. Officer Wilson," she stated calmly, loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "Shut up!" Wilson snarled, pressing her roughly against the vehicle. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer." As the handcuffs tightened around her wrists, Zora's mind wasn't on the injustice. It wasn't on anger. It was calculating, observing, planning. The Millfield police station hadn't changed since Zora was a teenager. The same faded blue walls, the same flickering fluorescent lights, the same American flag hanging limply in the corner. But now she was seeing it from the other side, from behind handcuffs. Most people in Zora's position would be panicking. But Commander Daniels wasn't most people. Her eyes methodically scanned the room, cataloging exits, security cameras, shift rotations. The same tactical assessment she performed in enemy territory, 3 officers on duty, 2 booking stations, 1 security camera with a blind spot near the water cooler. Officer Wilson strutted into the station, his face already showing signs of redness where he'd claimed Zora had struck him. "Got a live one here," he announced, shoving Zora forward. "Assaulted an officer during a routine stop." Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from boredom to discomfort as he took in Zora's composed demeanor. "She hit you?" Miller asked, eyebrow raised slightly. "Doesn't look the type." "They never do," Wilson replied, his false bravado echoing through the station. "Caught her with drugs, too. Regular traffic stop turned violent. Had to use considerable restraint to bring her in without escalating." Zora remained silent, her training kicking in. Years ago, in the brutal heat of Navy SEAL Hell Week, she had stood for hours in the freezing Pacific surf while instructors screamed in her face, trying to break her. "You think this is pain, Daniels?" Her instructor had yelled as hypothermia set in. "This isn't pain. This is just discomfort. And discomfort is temporary." Now, as Wilson embellished his story with increasingly dramatic proportions, that lesson returned. This too is temporary discomfort. "She came at me with some kind of fighting move," Wilson claimed, demonstrating an exaggerated karate chop that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "Lucky I've got quick reflexes." Officer Diaz, barely 25 and new to the force, glanced between Wilson and Zora with growing uncertainty. He noticed what others missed. Zora's hands showed no signs of having struck anyone. No redness, no swelling, nothing. Wilson disappeared for 30 minutes, returning with a triumphant smirk and a small plastic bag. "Look what I found hidden in her vehicle." The pills rattled as he dropped them on the booking desk. Zora's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Her car had been meticulously maintained since the day she bought it. Military precision and everything. Those pills hadn't been there before. "Illegal prescription drugs," Wilson announced. "Explains the erratic behavior." Sergeant Miller frowned slightly. "You searched the vehicle after the assault?" "Had probable cause," Wilson replied too quickly. "Smelled something suspicious." As they photographed and fingerprinted Zora, Officer Diaz noticed something else, the mechanical precision with which she followed directions. The perfect military posture, even in handcuffs. The situational awareness that seemed almost supernatural. "You can get your phone call," Diaz told her quietly, away from Wilson's earshot. Most people would have called family, a spouse, or a lawyer. But Zora called a number she knew by heart, speaking in clipped, precise language. Lieutenant Commander Daniels reporting. Delay in scheduled check-in. Location, Millfield Municipal Station. Situation, Charlie. The desk officer assumed she was speaking to a relative. Only Diaz noticed the military precision in her language, the codes embedded in her seemingly casual conversation. Throughout booking, the disrespect was systematic. "Stand here, sweetheart. Smile for the camera. Honey." Each demeaning comment was met with Zora's unwavering silence, her eyes cataloging faces, names, procedures. 2 hours later, Jeremy Wells, the overworked public defender, sat across from Zora in a dingy consultation room. His tie was stained, his eyes bloodshot from too many cases and too little sleep. Look, Miss Daniels, the situation is pretty straightforward. He skimmed her file. You've got no priors, which is good. But assaulting an officer is serious. Add drug possession charges. I didn't assault anyone, Zora stated calmly. And those drugs were planted. Wells sighed. He'd heard this before, from guilty clients, from innocent ones. After 10 years in this system, they all sounded the same. Officer Wilson has documented injuries, he countered. His report states you became combative during a routine traffic stop. His report is false. Well, the DA is willing to offer a deal. Plead guilty to a lesser charge of resisting arrest, drop the assault and drug charges. 6 months probation? No, Zora replied without hesitation. I will not plead guilty to something I didn't do. Miss Daniels, you need to understand the reality here. It's your word against a police officer's. Who do you think a jury in this town will believe? Zora leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wells, I understand reality better than most. I've spent my career assessing threats and calculating odds. I'm not accepting a plea deal. Wells left frustrated. Another client who wouldn't see reason. Across town, Wilson sat with Assistant District Attorney Karen Larson, painting a picture of a dangerous, unstable woman who attacked him without provocation. She was definitely on something, he insisted. Exhibited classic signs of stimulant abuse. Aggressive, confrontational. Then out of nowhere, boom, attacks me. Larson nodded, making notes, building the case based solely on Wilson's word. Another cog in a well-oiled machine, but machines can break down. And this one was about to encounter a wrench it never saw coming. At exactly 19:30 hours, the station phone rang. Sergeant Miller answered, his expression changing from boredom to confusion to concern. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. No, I wasn't aware of her status. He glanced toward the cells where Zora sat perfectly still, watching everything. Yes, sir. I'll personally look into it immediately. Miller hung up, staring at the phone like it might bite him. Diaz, he called out. Who authorized the arrest of Zora Daniels? Wilson, sir. Said she assaulted him during a traffic stop. Miller rubbed his face tiredly. Well, we might have a problem. That was Naval Special Warfare Command, asking why one of their officers missed a scheduled check-in. Diaz's eyes widened. Wait, she's military? Not just military, Miller muttered. Something a lot more complicated. The machine had started to sputter. The first domino had begun to fall. In courtroom 3 of the Millfield County Courthouse, the preliminary hearing for the state versus Zora Daniels began like clockwork. Judge Harmon, a 30-year veteran of the bench, presided with practiced efficiency. At 68, he'd seen it all, or so he thought. Officer Blake Wilson took the stand with rehearsed confidence, his uniform pressed, his demeanor solemn. A performance he'd given many times before, Officer Wilson? Please describe the events of yesterday afternoon, the prosecutor began. Wilson touched his face, where carefully applied makeup enhanced the redness that should have faded by now. I pulled over the defendant for running a stop sign. Standard procedure. But as soon as I approached the vehicle, I could tell something was off. The familiar script unfolded as Wilson built his narrative. A routine stop. An uncooperative suspect. The smell of something suspicious. When I asked her to exit the vehicle, that's when she became aggressive, Wilson testified, his voice hitting the practiced notes of righteous indignation. She lunged at me with what I can only describe as some kind of military fighting technique. He demonstrated for the court a ridiculous pantomime of what no trained fighter would ever do. I sustained injuries to my face and neck as I subdued her. My training helped me use minimal force despite the threat. From her seat beside her public defender, Zora watched, not with the nervous energy of most defendants, but with the calculated focus of someone mapping an enemy encampment. Her eyes tracked subtle interactions between the prosecutor and the clerk, the bailiff's position in relation to the exit, the judge's micro-expressions as Wilson's story grew increasingly elaborate. During the subsequent search of her vehicle, we discovered prescription medication not in her name, consistent with illegal distribution, Wilson concluded. Jeremy Wells barely took notes. His cross-examination was perfunctory at best. Officer Wilson, did my client have a prescription for these medications? Not that she provided, Wilson answered smoothly. No further questions. Your Honor, Zora leaned over and whispered something to Wells. He shook his head dismissively. Judge Harmon. however, had presided over enough of Wilson's arrests to sense something. Officer Wilson, you testified that the defendant struck you with what appeared to be a trained fighting technique. Did you seek medical attention for these injuries? Wilson hesitated just briefly. No, Your Honor. I've been trained to handle worse. And this alleged fighting technique? Have you encountered it before? Not specifically, Your Honor, he said. When Zora was called to enter her plea, something changed. Her posture straightened imperceptibly. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Not guilty. Your Honor, she said boldly. 2 simple words, but delivered with such unwavering certainty that the energy in the courtroom shifted. Judge Harmon studied her with renewed interest. Miss Daniels, do you have anything you'd like to say before judgment? This was her moment. Before her lawyer could intervene, Zora addressed the court directly. Your Honor, I am not a flight risk. I have served my country honorably for 12 years and continue to do so. I have no criminal record. The charges against me are fabricated, as will become evident in due course. The prosecutor jumped up. Your Honor, the defendant assaulted a police officer and was found with illegal prescription medication. The state requests bail be set at $50,000. Judge Harmon's gaze remained on Zora. What branch of the military, Miss Daniels? Navy, Your Honor. Current rank, Lieutenant Commander. Mouths opened in shock. Nobody knew she held that power. Wilson shifted uncomfortably. This hadn't shown up in his background check. And your current assignment? The judge asked. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of my assignment in open court, Your Honor, but my commanding officer can verify my status if necessary. The first card had been played. Not her full hand, not even close, but enough to change the game. Judge Harmon nodded slowly. Bail is set at $5,000. Next case. The prosecutor's objection died on his lips as the gavel fell. As Zora rose, something had changed in her demeanor. The passive observer had given way to controlled action. The hunter was awakening. In the courthouse hallway, after posting bail, Zora made 2 calls. The first was to her aunt, brief and reassuring. The second was longer, filled with military precision, to a number that didn't appear in any public directory. Wilson, unable to accept that his plan hadn't gone as expected, made his fatal error. He approached Zora as she waited outside the courthouse. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed, crowding her space, unaware that her peripheral vision was tracking his every movement. Dropping your military service like it means something. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Zora's response was measured, her voice calm. Officer Wilson, I believe it would be in your best interest to step back. Or what? You'll attack me again? His voice rose, drawing attention from passers-by. Nobody's going to believe you over me. I've been on the force for 15 years. You're just another perp with a fancy story. I haven't attacked anyone, Officer Wilson, but I do believe in preparation. Wilson didn't notice her hand casually positioned at her lapel. He didn't register the small recording device capturing his every word. You think that matters? Wilson sneered. I've put away people a lot smarter than you. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be lucky if you're just dishonorably discharged. I know people in this town, judges, prosecutors. This is my territory. Each threat, each admission of corruption was captured perfectly for future use. One more thing, Wilson added with a smirk. You might want to check on that fancy car of yours. Impound lots can be so careless with personal property. Things go missing. Get damaged. Real shame. As he walked away, satisfied with his intimidation, Zora allowed herself the faintest smile. In tactical warfare, there's a principle. Sometimes you must allow the enemy to advance into a vulnerable position before you strike. Officer Blake Wilson had just marched directly into her trap. Within hours of her release, the walls of Zora's motel room bore the unmistakable organization of a military intelligence briefing. Case files, timelines, connections mapped with precision. Each element meticulously arranged with the exactitude that came from years of planning high-risk operations, where the smallest details determined who lived and who died. 6 years earlier, during advanced SEAL intelligence training, Zora had excelled at exactly this kind of work. While other trainees focused on direct action tactics, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to piece together fragments of information into actionable intelligence. Now, those same skills focused on Officer Blake Wilson, his arrest record, his testimony in previous cases, his financial transactions. The picture began to emerge, not of an overzealous cop abusing his power, but of something more sinister. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. 17 arrests in the past year with remarkable similarities. Predominantly minority suspects. Traffic stops that escalated to searches. Drugs conveniently discovered in vehicles. Charges that would be dropped in exchange for guilty pleas to lesser offenses. The statistics told a story most would miss. But Zora wasn't most people. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. 3 quick taps, exactly as arranged. Officer Diaz stood outside, still in uniform but clearly off duty, nervousness evident in his posture. "I shouldn't be here," he said, glancing over his shoulder as he entered. "Yet here you are," Zora replied calmly, offering him a seat. "Because something doesn't feel right." Diaz took in the organized investigation board, his eyes widening. "You're really military, aren't you? Wilson said you made that up." "Lieutenant Commander, Naval Special Warfare," she confirmed. "Look, I don't know what's happening, but Wilson's arrest reports, they follow a pattern. Always the same language, always the same charges." Diaz hesitated, then continued. "Last month I saw him planting evidence in a suspect's car. When I asked about it, Sergeant Miller pulled me aside and told me to forget what I saw if I wanted to keep my job." The final piece clicked into place. Miller's discomfort at the station wasn't just uncertainty. It was complicity. Diaz slid a USB drive across the table. Departmental records, arrest histories, body cam footage that had never made it into evidence. "I made copies before they could disappear." The data revealed what Zora had suspected, but couldn't yet prove. Wilson's history of fabricated charges wasn't random. It was targeted, calculated, and profitable. In the quiet of night, as she analyzed financial records, the connection showed up. Deposits to offshore accounts following certain arrests. A pattern of suspects who worked for a rival drug operation being targeted, while others walked free. The pills planted in her car were the same prescription medications seized in a raid. 3 months earlier, but never properly logged into evidence. Wilson wasn't just a bigoted cop abusing his power, he was on someone's payroll. The trail led to Marcus Reynolds, owner of 3 nightclubs on the north side of town and rumored supplier for half the county. The same Marcus Reynolds who contributed generously to the police benevolent fund. The same Marcus Reynolds whose competitors kept finding themselves arrested by Officer Wilson. More disturbing were the case files of those who tried to fight back. Tamara Johnson, who filed a complaint against Wilson 3 years ago, suddenly found herself facing additional charges until she withdrew her statement. James Martinez, who had video evidence contradicting Wilson's testimony, mysteriously lost that footage when his house was burglarized before trial. The pattern of intimidation and corruption extended beyond Wilson to parts of the department itself. Sergeant Miller's signature appeared on dozens of questionable evidence logs, each one helping to bury procedural violations that would have exposed the scheme. As dawn broke, Zora placed one final photo on her board. Sergeant Miller meeting with Reynolds behind a closed restaurant. An image captured by a local blogger who thought he was documenting an innocent meeting, but was actually photographing the gears of corruption turning. At the station, Wilson sat at his desk, scrolling through personnel databases. The name Zora, Daniels finally returned a hit, a basic military service record. Navy, as she had claimed, but nothing indicating special operations. Nothing suggesting she was anything more than an administrative officer with a desk job. "Administrative specialist," he snorted, showing the screen to a fellow officer, pencil pusher trying to act tough. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't access, was that Zora's true service record was classified, buried behind security clearances he couldn't imagine. The sanitized version he was seeing was deliberately designed to conceal her actual role and capabilities. Wilson leaned back in his chair, confidence restored. Just another defendant to break, just another case to manipulate. But unknown to him, the trap was already set. The evidence compiled. The strategy mapped out with military precision. Commander Zora Daniels wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Tamara Johnson, for James Martinez, for every person Wilson had victimized in his years of corruption. And when Navy SEALs fight, they don't fight to participate. They fight to win. That evening, a black SUV with government plates arrived at the Millfield Inn without fanfare. Its sole occupant, Captain Richard Hargrove, stepped out in a tailored civilian suit. Zora opened the door with measured caution, then stood aside with the faintest smile. "Didn't expect to see you in person, Captain. When one of my best officers gets arrested on bogus charges, I make exceptions to protocol," Hargrove said. For the first time since her arrest, Zora's military bearing softened slightly. The presence of her commanding officer, the man who had selected her for SEAL training when many doubted a woman could complete the program, brought a sense of validation to her fight. Hargrove surveyed the investigation board with professional appreciation. "I see your intelligence-gathering skills haven't dulled in peacetime." "This isn't exactly peacetime, sir," Zora replied. Hargrove nodded, placing a classified folder on the desk. "Your message triggered some inquiries. Turns out Officer Wilson has pinged on federal radar before." The folder contained what Zora had been missing, the official documentation that transformed suspicion into actionable intelligence. Wilson's bank records showed unexplained deposits corresponding with certain arrests, internal affairs complaints buried by sympathetic superiors, connections to known drug operations that crossed state lines, bringing them into federal jurisdiction. "There's someone else you should meet," Hargrove said, checking his watch. Right on schedule, a sharp knock at the door. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen entered, her JAG Corps insignia visible on her impeccable uniform. "Commander Daniels?" Chen nodded professionally. "I've reviewed your case. Textbook frame-up, but they made mistakes. Multiple procedural violations, chain of custody issues with the alleged evidence, inconsistencies in Officer Wilson's testimony." Over the next hour, a precise military operation took shape, not with weapons and tactics, but with legal strategies and evidence chains. Chen outlined jurisdictional authorities, procedural requirements, and the exact legal framework that would expose Wilson's corruption. "We don't just want dismissal," Zora explained, pointing to her board. "Wilson is part of a larger operation. These victims deserve justice." Chen's strategy was surgical. "We'll use the preliminary hearing to spring the trap. Once Wilson commits to his false testimony under oath, we'll introduce the contradictory evidence, force him to either admit his lies or commit perjury." "What about Sergeant Miller?" Hargrove asked, studying the connection charts. "Secondary target," Zora explained, "but essential to proving the systemic nature of the corruption." As the sun set, the plan crystallized. Not just a defense strategy, but a counteroffensive designed to dismantle the entire corrupt operation. Chen would replace Zora's public defender. Hargrove would ensure federal authorities were standing by once the local case broke open. "Wilson won't go down without a fight," Chen warned. "Men like him rarely do." "I'm counting on it," Zora replied, her calm confidence in stark contrast to the storm they were about to unleash. Across town, Wilson paced his living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. His cool facade was cracking for the first time. Something didn't feel right about this case. Despite the sanitized military record he'd found, he couldn't shake the feeling that Zora Daniels was different from his usual targets. His phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Miller. "Hearing tomorrow. Stick to the script." This goes away like all the others, but doubt gnawed at him. His usual methods, intimidation, evidence manipulation, procedural shortcuts, had always worked before. Yet something about Daniel's composure in court, the way she observed everything without fear, triggered an instinct he'd long ignored. Near midnight, Wilson made his fateful decision. If there was something to find on Zora Daniels, he'd find it himself. The motel parking lot was nearly empty as Wilson's unmarked car pulled in. Room 214 showed no lights. His police training kicked in as he approached the door, tools ready to make quick work of the lock. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see, were the custom motion sensors Zora had installed hours earlier. Military-grade cameras now recorded his every move. The lock yielded to his tools. The door opened silently. Wilson stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the darkened room. Empty. Not just vacant, completely cleared out. No investigation board. No evidence. No sign that Zora Daniels had ever been there. Just a single red light blinking on a device mounted near the ceiling. Looking for something, Officer Wilson? The voice came from the speaker. Zora's voice, calm and expectant, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. The color drained from Wilson's face as he realized his fatal error. The trap wasn't set for court tomorrow. The trap was here, and he had just walked into it. Behind him, flashing lights illuminated the parking lot. Not police lights, but federal agents positioned exactly where Zora had calculated they'd have optimal lines of sight. In warfare, the perfect ambush isn't just about the attack. It's about knowing your enemy so well that you can predict their movements, manipulate their decisions, and lead them exactly where you want them to go. Wilson stood frozen as the magnitude of his miscalculation became clear. He wasn't hunting Zora Daniels. She had been hunting him. The next day, Courtroom 3 of the Millfield County Courthouse was filled beyond capacity. The atmosphere crackled with tension, not the routine kind of a legal proceeding, but something primal, the air before a storm. Judge Harmon surveyed the room with narrowed eyes. The gallery was unusually full of stern men and women with military bearing, seated strategically throughout. Captain Hargrove sat directly behind the defense table, his presence a silent statement of support. Officer Wilson took the stand with practiced confidence, but those watching closely noticed subtle signs of strain, a tightness around his eyes, fingers tapping restlessly against his thigh, sweat darkening his crisp uniform despite the cool air. "Officer Wilson," the prosecutor began, "please describe for the court the events leading to the defendant's arrest." Wilson recited his version of events with rehearsed precision. The routine traffic stop, the alleged aggression, the supposed assault, the discovery of illicit medication. "She came at me without warning," he testified, pointing to the makeup-enhanced marks on his face. "Used some kind of military fighting technique. If not for my defensive training, my injuries could have been severe." Then came the twist. "Your Honor," Jeremy Wells announced, "the defense would like to introduce Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, who will be taking over as counsel for Commander Daniels." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. Wilson's face flickered with uncertainty as Chen approached the bench, credentials in hand. "Your Honor, the United States Navy has an interest in these proceedings, as they involve a decorated officer facing charges that could impact national security," Chen said. The court recognized her as counsel. The energy in the room shifted. This was no longer just another case. Chen began her cross-examination with surgical precision. "Officer Wilson, you testified that my client struck you in the face, resulting in these injuries you display today, correct?" "That's correct," Wilson replied. "I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A," Chen said. The dashcam footage from Wilson's patrol car filled the courtroom screens. It showed Zora standing with her hands visible on the vehicle at all times. The crucial moment arrived. Wilson approached, then suddenly staggered backward, clutching his face. Zora never moved. "Would you care to explain how the defendant struck you without moving her hands from the vehicle?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "The angle doesn't show everything." "Perhaps this angle will be more illuminating," Chen continued, introducing footage from a nearby business security camera. Again, it clearly showed Zora motionless while Wilson staged his stumble. Objections flew, but Chen pressed on. A forensic examiner testified that Wilson's injuries were inconsistent with blunt force trauma, more likely self-inflicted or cosmetic. Then came the recovered body cam footage. A 47-second gap during the alleged assault, restored by technical experts. The video showed Wilson deliberately disabling his camera before reactivating it. "Did you tamper with official evidence, Officer Wilson?" Chen asked. "There must have been a malfunction," Wilson stammered. "A malfunction that coincidentally occurred at the exact moment of the alleged assault?" The case collapsed further as Officer Diaz testified. He revealed Wilson had searched Zora's car alone, breaking the chain of custody. Finally, Chen revealed Zora's full classified service record. She wasn't an administrative officer. She was one of only 3 women to complete SEAL training. A decorated Navy SEAL awarded the Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and multiple commendations. If Commander Daniels had actually struck Officer Wilson, his injuries would not be superficial. They would be severe, unmistakable, and he would not be standing here today, Chen declared. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Wilson's facade cracked. Judge Harmon dismissed the charges with prejudice and referred Wilson for investigation. Wilson erupted. This is because she's military, isn't it? If she were just another... He stopped short of the slur, but the meaning hung in the air. You will control yourself in my courtroom, Judge Harmon warned, but Wilson was beyond control. You people always stick together. The system's rigged. Federal agents rose from the gallery. Officer Blake Wilson, you are under arrest for evidence tampering, witness intimidation, perjury, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. As they cuffed him, Wilson spat, You set me up! Zora met his gaze steadily. No, Officer Wilson. You set yourself up. I simply ensured the truth had its day in court. The hunter had become the hunted. Days later, in the community center that once faced closure, Zora sat across from Officer Diaz. Children practiced on newly donated instruments in the background. What made you step forward? She asked. You risked your career. I became an officer to protect people, not to prey on them, Diaz said. When I saw what was happening, I couldn't be part of it. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't facing an enemy, Zora told him. It's facing our own institutions when they fail their purpose. 1 week later, Zora stood in dress uniform at a naval ceremony. This commendation wasn't for battlefield heroism, but for moral courage. Her actions had brought honor not just to herself, but to the principles the uniform represented. Meanwhile, Wilson sat in a rehabilitation program for disgraced officers, his badge gone, his power stripped. For the first time, he was forced to confront the prejudices and failures that had transformed him from protector to predator. At sunset, Zora visited her father's grave. She placed a small stone on the headstone in quiet remembrance. The system that broke you didn't break me, she whispered, and maybe now it's a little less broken itself. Her leave ended the next day. She would return to classified missions where split-second decisions determined life and death. But she left her hometown slightly more just than she had found it. For a warrior like Commander Zora Daniels, that might have been the most meaningful victory of all.